Hey, welcome back. In this video, I'm going to be getting into a little bit more detail on the characteristic curve. This is a shorter video, and I'm getting into breaking up the top and the bottom part of the curve primarily. Now, the important thing to remember is that when I'm talking about these elements on the top and bottom part of the characteristic curve, what I'm really talking about is adjustments you can make to your camera. But what I'm trying to do is overlay them onto the characteristic curve so you can see what's actually happening to the image when you make those adjustments. All of this will become very clear once we get into POV, and also once we get into the final videos where we're combining the elements of the characteristic curve and overlaying them on POV to essentially develop visual style. So let's get to it. Now we've gone through the overall curve in a bit more detail, I want to go in and break down the specific sections of the curve, and I'm going to go through this pretty quickly because I really just want to give you an idea of what the different points are, just so that it gives you a little bit of an overall view of the curve in detail, and that way you'll understand a little bit more when we get into the application of the curve into the camera and into real-world situations. What we've got here is basically two curves, and we've talked about this already in the previous video. The first one, the flatter curve, it represents basically a log curve or a raw curve, and the second one represents more like a Rec 709. So just keep in mind that the flatter the curve, the more you're getting towards like a log C or a C log 3 or to a raw, where you've got massive dynamic range and a lot of latitude. And we're going to get into dynamic range and latitude in the next video, but the flatter the curve, the more latitude you've got. And then when we go into, drop LUTs into it and go into color grading, then obviously we're snapping the curve up, pulling the highlights down, pulling the blacks down, and just tightening up the overall image, bringing in the contrast and coloring it and giving it the color grading that we need for the final product. The next one we're looking at here is the knee point. That's the point where the gamma curve breaks into the white gamma at the top, and that knee point can be moved up and down. Generally, you've got to be careful where you put the knee point, because if you bring it down too low, it'll come down the gamma curve to about the level of skin tone, and then skin tone will start to go negative, and you get all sorts of aberrations happening. So if you do bring the point down where you're going to roll off into the whites by changing that knee point, you need to only adjust it a small amount, and generally somewhere in the 10 to 15, 20% range is about as far as you would want to go. Otherwise you get down into skin tones. The next one is the knee slope, and the knee slope is the gradient of the curve, of the portion of the curve above the knee point. So you can change that gradient so that you roll off into the whites and get more white detail or less white detail. So wherever you put that knee slope will determine the amount of detail that you've got in the whites after you go over the knee point. The white clip, everyone knows what white clip is. That's where you cut off all detail in the whites. And you can again slide that up and down the curve so that you can put white clip in at any point in the curve. Generally, you don't want to go any further down than about 90%. If you assume that the top part of the curve is 100%, so you're talking 10%. The master gamma determines the actual slope of the central portion of the curve, or the straight line portion of the curve. So if you've got a lower contrast, you've got a smaller gamma, for example 0.35, and if you've got a high contrast curve, then you've got a higher gamma, say 0.75, and these numbers again are just for example. So the flatter the curve, the lower the contrast, the steeper the curve, the higher the contrast. That's the main takeaway from this. Master gain, obviously we all know what master gain is. That raises the sensitivity of the sensor, and the price you pay for increasing your gain is you end up with more noise in the image. Master pedestal is the area between the bottom part of shadow detail and zero. That's the master pedestal, and that can be raised up and down to give you softer blacks or deeper blacks. And then black stretch finally is the angle of the bottom part of the curve. So the same as up the top we had knee slope, down the bottom we've got black stretch. And again, these names are different for different manufacturers. Everyone has a different name for this stuff, but essentially if you remember what the curve is actually doing in each of these things, then you don't really need to know the name unless you really want to get into it and you look it up in the manuals for the camera that you're most familiar with, and that'll give you the actual name that your manufacturer uses. But anyway, that's a quick breakdown. What you should do is go through your camera, find out what the actual names of all these different parameters are, and write them into your workbook so that you've got the actual name for the camera that you're using, whether it's the Alexa or a Red or a Blackmagic or a Canon or whatever it might be. That pretty much covers getting into the curve in detail. In the next video, I'm going to talk about dynamic range and latitude. Okay, I hope you got some good information from that. If you liked what you saw, give us a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber yet, click on the subscribe button so you get notified when I upload new videos. And once again, thanks for watching. See you soon.